Acquisition of the Philippines greatly increased the already strong U.S. interest in Asia. Americans were particularly concerned with the future of China, with which the U.S. already had an important trade and which was now so weak that it provided a tempting target to stronger countries. You'll recall from John Green's lecture this discussion about carving up China. By 1900, Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and Japan were beginning to carve it up amongst themselves. They pressured the Chinese government for concessions, which gave them effective control over various regions of China. In some cases, they simply seized control over areas of China and claimed them as their own. Many Americans feared this would cut them out of the China trade altogether. Eager for a way to protect U.S. interest in China without provoking a war, McKinley issued a statement in September of 1898 saying that the U.S. wanted access to China but no special advantages there. Quote, asking only the open door for ourselves, we are ready to accord the open door to others. Now, the next year, John Hay, the Secretary of State, translated these words into a policy when he addressed a similar message to the other powers, Britain, Germany, Russia, France, Japan, and Italy, asking them to approve three principles. Number one, each nation with a sphere of influence in China was to respect the rights of other nations in its sphere. Number two, Chinese officials were to continue to collect tariffs in all spheres. The existing tariff, by the way, benefited the U.S., and nations were not to discriminate against other nations in levying port dues and railroad rates within their spheres. This was called the open door policy, and these principles would allow the U.S. to trade freely with China without fear of interference and without having to become militarily involved in the region. It also would preserve the illusion of sovereignty and prevent for China and prevent colonial dismemberment, which would create obstacles to U.S. trade. Europe and Japan received the open door proposals coolly. Russia openly rejected them, and the other powers claimed to accept them in principle, but would be unable to act unless all the other powers agreed. And we'll do this if everybody agrees, knowing that's not going to happen. Hay refused to see this as a defeat. He boldly announced that all the powers had completely accepted the open door principles, and that the U.S. expected them to observe those principles. But short of war, the U.S. could not really prevent another power from violating the open door. No sooner had the maneuvering over this policy ended when the Boxers, a secret Chinese nationalist martial arts society, launched a revolt against foreigners in China. The climax of the Boxer Rebellion was a siege of the entire foreign diplomatic corps, which took refuge in the British embassy in Beijing. The imperial powers, including the U.S., sent an international expeditionary force into China to rescue the diplomats. In August of 1900, they broke the siege. McKinley and Hay had agreed to U.S. participation to secure a voice in the settlement of the uprising and to prevent the partition of China by European powers. Hay won support for the open door approach from Britain and Germany. Others were induced to accept compensation from the Chinese for damages. Chinese territorial integrity survived, at least in name, and the U.S. retained access to profitable trade. Now, the war with Spain revealed glaring deficiencies in the American military system. The Army exhibited the greatest weaknesses, but the entire military had exhibited problems of supply, training, and coordination. Had the U.S. been fighting a more powerful nation, the result would have been disastrous. After the war, McKinley appointed Elihu Root, a corporate lawyer from New York, as Secretary of War to supervise a major overhaul of the military. This is interesting. This was the first time we're not putting a general type in charge. Root was the first of many attorney statesmen who moved between the private and public spheres and constituted much of what would become the foreign policy establishment. Between 1900 and 1903, Root created a new military system. His reforms included expanding the regular army, the standing army, from 25,000 to 100,000. Established federal army standards for the National Guard, each state's militia, ensuring we would never again fight a war with volunteer regiments trained and equipped differently from the regular army. He created a system of officer training schools, including the Army War College in Washington. In 1903, established a general staff, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, to act as advisors to the Secretary of War. Root considered this last his most important reform, a central planning agency modeled on European general staffs. We borrowed this from the increasingly militarized nations of Europe. As a result of these reforms, the U.S. entered the 20th century with something resembling a modern military system, and it would make extensive use of it.